Snafu is a podcast that contains adult themes and language. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey guys, welcome to Snafu, where the situation's normal, all fucked up. This is the podcast where we tell you stories of true crime, true mystery, and the truly fucked up shit that happens every single day, and then we just forget about it. So, we decided we wanted to remind you. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Corey. Thanks for coming back, guys. Glad to have you here after the holiday weekend, or, if you're a time traveler not American, wherever you are right now. Let's get first things first. We did get our box of stickers in, so if you guys want to get one of the Snafu stickers, which look great, by the way,
Whoop, whoop.
You just got to send us a review on iTunes or Spotify.
Nope.
No, just iTunes. Take a screenshot of that bad boy, send it over to us on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or email, and we'll get your stickers over to you if you send us your address and how you want to receive your stickers.
Yeah, just tell us where to send it to. Beyond that, we're just super glad to be back. We actually did manage to make it to the north and came back not being a frozen popsicle.
It's summertime. It's not that cold up there.
No, I know that, but I was nervous, and it was a lot of fun. We saw, we're there for the 4th of July, and we're in like a very northern area where a lot of the revolutionaries moved about. Our presidents were in those areas.
Yep, there's a giant cheese wheel that a president got to eat once.
Yeah, I guess there was that. That
was awesome. The giant cheese wheel. It's giant.
It sure was. I will not deny that fact. We also got to see Susan B. Anthony's house,
which is always awesome.
Yeah, I did not sacrifice Corey there. It was too pretty. They had really gotten it nice and back, and so I just didn't want to get blood everywhere.
It was probably the smarter move.
Yeah, no, we're excited to be back, and we're kind of done with the whole 4th of July thing. I think
Speak for yourself. This is America. We're never done with 4th of July.
So, I mean, at least I can say, I think coming off of the 4th of July, I think I am. Maybe a lot of our American listeners can agree that we're all kind of getting really, really annoyed by all the fireworks constantly going off.
That's why.
Yeah,
fireworks are the best thing ever, whenever.
They are awesome, except for random in the middle of the night and for no fucking reason.
No, that's why they're good.
There's one, and then my dog is upset. And she's asking why I did this, and I didn't do it, but I have no answer. So. Yeah, I had to turn my frustration into something productive, so I wouldn't just turn into some screaming banshee and just lay waste the whole neighborhood. Yeah, no, I kind of actually got inspired by it, and I thought, let's come off the serial killers, a little over that mass death. Let's talk about something else. So today we're going to be talking about an explosion that some called, to quote, the world's first weapon of mass destruction.
Is it, though?
Yeah, it gets really freaking bad.
Talking explosions might bring a lot of random thoughts to your mind, but this ain't no Wile E. Coyote shit we're talking.
This is big.
We're not talking about mining blasts or nukes either. Today we're telling the story of the Halifax explosion, the biggest and most deadly man-made explosion prior to World War II.
Yeah. It's huge.
And our story takes place in Halifax Harbor in Nova Scotia in December of 1917. Now there are two port cities bordering this harbor, and those are the city of Halifax and Dartmouth. And these are at a time both very thriving areas. The population of the area had grown recently and was up to about 65,000 people. This was due to the fact that World War I was in full swing, and because this particular harbor was one of two main points of departure to Europe from Nova Scotia.
Yeah, you got everybody shipping out of here and new companies blowing up because people are trying to buy and sell supplies. Whole families are moving here just to...
Rhode Island had a lot of the same, where they had a giant degaussing factory. That was during World War II, so you didn't accidentally set off some sort of mine. They degaussed your ship like you used to do the old monitors, and it all went crazy.
Huh.
For those of you who remember playing with old tube monitors, that's what those were called. But this harbor was considered one of the British Royal Navy's most important North American bases.
Yeah, and also it's super old. This is the harbor they were coming out of to harass us in the Revolutionary times, and it switched hands a lot. But at this point, the Royal Navy's definitely taken over. They're extending it, and it's growing. And like I said, you got your soldiers and you have their families. A lot of people are moving into town.
And so with all that, all the people coming in, it being a very important base for the Allies, there's a lot of really necessary supplies being routed into the city, and they're being put on in the harbor, putting on boats, and they're going out to be where they're useful. It also makes it that this is an essential port to protect. You see, the Germans are already successfully attacking Allied ships as they cross the Atlantic Ocean, and the Allied forces had begun building protections and changing safety protocols throughout our coasts.
Yeah, there's a huge fear about submarines at the time. There's
fears down here about submarines too, down in Florida.
Yeah, I mean all the way up and down the coast, but during World War II on both ends, like there's a whole movie, 1942, all built around the idea that like a German U-boat or submarine is going to come in and blow everything to hell.
There's another point I used to go hang out at in the Northeast where people used to walk around with parasol umbrellas and watch for U-boats.
Hemingway used to try and hunt down German U-boats in Cuba.
Yeah.
Or he thought he was. He was pretty drunk.
Nobody
knows what he was.
He was probably going to punch them.
So it's essential. Like, this definitely did need to be a protected harbor.
Yeah, and Halifax Harbor was no different. It had an army garrison protecting it and the city. Gun batteries were in place, as well as anti-submarine nets that were placed around the harbor and ran on a curfew. So if you were out too late, submarine net came up, and, well, that's not going to be good for any submarine who's in the area. All neutral ships bound for North America were required to report to Halifax for inspection. The city had a new military hospital and often had military ships transporting the wounded to this port.
So it's a busy port.
Yeah, it's very busy. All the ships with their supplies and animals and troops bound for Europe would gather in the harbor to form a convoy to be escorted by the British Navy.
Yeah, and it can be pretty difficult to like picture this area, especially not having a map in front of you. We're going to try our best for just a moment to describe it. It's probably going to be terrible, and I suggest you go look at a picture whenever you get the chance. But, so at the very top, you have Bedford Bay, situated just above Halifax in Dartmouth. And to me, it sort of looks like a fist in a way that if it was a fist pointing down and at the bottom of that fist, your finger was sticking out, right?
Sure.
And so if Bedford Bay is that fist, the finger is going to be considered what is called the Narrows.
And on either side of this finger is Dartmouth on the right when you're looking at it as a regular map. And so the top of the finger and on the bottom of it is Halifax. Now, Shannon writes the best descriptions of maps. I would just tell you to open a map.
This is what it looked like to me.
But,
what does the finger do?
This is all Shannon stuff. The finger boops what looks like an open alligator snout, and which is really the run out to the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, so the way the map, it looks like an alligator with his mouth open, and someone's booping him on the nose with his finger.
Sure, yeah. I'm just going to tell you guys all to go pick up an atlas and go look up a map of Halifax Harbor.
Okay, so yeah, so that's basically what it looks like. And okay, sorry, that's the best we can do. So on December 3rd, 1917, the Norwegian ship, the SS Emo, arrived in Halifax Harbor for its neutral inspection. Just like we said, if you were coming through, like, you had to stop there. They had sailed from the Netherlands and they were headed to New York in order to take on relief supplies from Belgium. So the Emo and its crew spent about 2 days in Bedford Basin as the ship waited to be refueled. And the Emo had intended to leave the port on December 5th, but, unfortunately for it, the coal load that it was expecting to get wasn't delivered until later that day. And by the time they actually ended up being fueled up, ready to go, they had already hit past curfew and the anti-submarine nets would have been in place. So unfortunately for them, the SS Emo is stuck in port for another night.
And they had to wear their skinny jeans and listen to their really sad music. Actually, it's spelled IMO, guys. So we're just going to call it emo because it makes me giggle.
I didn't realize, I was like, what is that joke? And if that was like a thing from the Netherlands.
But... No, it's a thing from emo music, which we all grew up on.
Yeah, so it's IMO or emo.
You're a child.
So anyways, meanwhile, the other side of those anti-submarine nets, there was waiting another boat to come in, and there was the SS Mont Blanc, which was a French cargo ship under the captainage of Ami Le Medec. And so this guy, he's got 11 years under his belt as a captain. The majority of the crew's French, and some of them they're Algerian, but basically they mostly speak French. And They are waiting to come in. Now, before the war, the SS Mont Blanc would never have been permitted to spend the night in the harbor regardless. Like, this would have been breaking rules because, you see, the Mont Blanc was literally a ticking time bomb. It had a huge load that just happened to be full of tons and tons of explosives.
Hot dogs. Oh. Explosives, okay.
Yeah. In fact, there was 2,925 tons.
That's the number of hot dogs that guy ate on the 4th of
Oh,
July.
my God. So its forward hold, it held wet and dried picric acid. And that happened to be the most popular detonator of World War I.
It was like the prom queen of detonators.
And then in the center hold, that hold was filled with gun cotton. And then in the aft hold, so the back end of the boat, they were carrying TNT.
Oh, great.
Then, just to top it all off, the ship had actually taken on about 400 barrels of benzene. So, airplane fuel.
Yeah, that's a fuel, yep.
All of it's just stacked all over the top deck of the ship, and the barrels weren't secured properly, and then overall just having them there was against regulation. And beside that, there was also a stack of shells, which happened to be the ammunition for the 2 90mm guns that the ship had on board.
Oh, so yeah, this is a shitstorm of a ship.
This is a freaking nightmare and should never have been allowed, but in fact was something that was common for most of the ships carrying ammunition at the time for World War I. But like we said, rules had changed about what ships could come through the harbor, and this ship would make a great target for the Axis powers. You know, being afraid of German U-boats wasn't a joke.
Yeah.
And Jesus, wouldn't this be an amazing boat to blow up, right?
I don't know if they'd understand what would happen if they did it, though.
Understandably, the Mont Blanc really wanted to join that convoy that they were looking to hook up with in the bay. Because at this point, like we said, like because of so many attacks, huge convoys were going out. So they wanted that protection of the naval ships just to get over to Europe. And it sucked that the fact that they showed up late that night and couldn't cross into the bay. So they were just like sitting ducks out on the Atlantic side all night waiting for those nets to be raised and so that they can come through. Which is also perhaps why that they didn't actually fly the red flag that they were supposed to put up to announce the fact that they were a munition ship, that they were carrying explosives.
We don't want to be bothered. Please leave us alone.
So, in fact, that evening, the night that they couldn't come through, harbor pilot Francis McKay, so like a local guy who's a professional harbor pilot, he knows what's going on. He boards the Mont Blanc and he actually questions them about their load. He's like, okay, what's the special precautions? Do you have any protection put in place, because you're carrying this? And in fact, they just inform him like, no special protections, just as is. And he's like, well, cool. Yeah, you're gonna come through anyways.
The second part of that kind of shocks me because for those of you who don't really know what the pilots do, if you ever go on any cruise ship or near any major harbor, they're going to send out what's called a pilot boat. It's a little like cigarette boat, and it's got a guy who he represents the harbor master. One, he knows all the twists and turns and exactly where you need to put that boat or the bigger ship to get it through so you don't accidentally hit a rock or hit a soft spot a high spot in the sand.
Yeah, because they don't have the detectors at this time to let them know what's coming underneath. And the only people, you're either going to have a map from the area, very specific, or the only people who are going to know it are the local guys that do it every day. And
they also represent the local area, so they know all of the problems. So the fact that he's just like, they have all these people, 65,000 people on either side of this harbor, but he's like, oh yeah, this isn't secured, we'll let you in. That one kind of shocks me because he should be looking out for the harbor as a whole. The
barrels should have raised a problem. However, the fact is like I said, a lot of these boats have been coming through carrying similar loads. So, if he were to stop everyone and make them unload until they can only carry what they needed, our allies, Europe, wasn't going to get the supplies they needed.
Yeah. And by the morning of December 6th, both ships are up and operational, just waiting for the anti-submarine nets to get out of the way. So they're just kind of waiting. It's when you go fishing, you see it all the time when there's a lock on the water. People are just waiting, or they're waiting at a bridge. Same thing. By early morning, both ships, they get themselves underway, and now by nautical law, a ship's right side, the starboard side, should be kept to land so that ships may pass port to port, left side to left side.
Yeah.
At 7:30 in the morning, the Mont Blanc leaves her anchorage at the mouth of the harbor and begins heading up towards the bay. Its starboard hugging the Dartmouth side.
So its right side hugging the shore.
Yeah. And she was the second ship to enter the harbor that morning.
Yeah, she was eager to get in there.
And especially when you're waiting overnight and you have a nervous captain, yeah, you're going to be moving as quick as you can. The SS Emo was given the signal to move at 7:30 a.m. as well. Irritated by the forced delay from yesterday, the captain was kind of already angsty. In fact, he had his engines running at nearly 9 knots, well above the allowed speed for 5 knots in these tight shipping lanes. In a lot of these harbors, they have docking speed. And these docking speeds were enforced to keep ships from becoming a hazard to other ships.
Yeah, you're in a busy area. You can't be speeding around and joyriding and going as fast as you want because you have to be aware of everyone around you and how they're functioning too. I mean, you got things from giant naval ships down to little tugboats.
Yeah.
Like everyone's got to function.
As the Emo heads towards the Atlantic, the ship comes across an American steamer, the SS Clara, which happened to be coming up the wrong way. Pilots from the SS Clara and the Emo managed to work out how to pass one another, and both these pilots are people that are from the harbor, because they know it, like we were saying.
Well, I don't know that the one coming in the wrong fucking way is.
Maybe not. Maybe they hadn't gotten their pilot yet. That's a good point. Pilots from the Clara and the Emo managed to work out how to pass one another, and the Emo, she moves further into the middle, allowing each ship to pass by itself illegally, starboard to starboard, as opposed to the port to port.
Yeah, so they're passing right side to right side when they're supposed to be passing left side to left.
Yeah, but, they're making it so for this one pass, But
the important point on this would be that the Emo is now pulled further into the center, further off course.
The Emo is not where she should be.
And it's okay. Like, you're not supposed to do it, but he's doing a pass, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately...
instead of rerouting back closer to starboard, the Emo continues to move forward at its higher speed and its wrong location. Eventually, it comes up to a tugboat named the Stella Marie. In fact, the Emo is moving so quickly that it causes the captain of the tug to take extra precaution, and he moves further to starboard, closer to shore, to avoid an accident. Now, the captain of the Emo, he just wants to get out of there, he wants to get into the ocean, and he wants to make up for lost time, but he's doing it terribly incorrect.
Yeah, he's really making this difficult for everybody else.
Yep, and the Emo, in turn, he passes the tug, causing the Emo to go further off its course.
Yeah, and again, this is incredibly dangerous. This is a major port, and there's tons of boats, ships, just like we said, everybody's just trying to function in a very limited space, which just happens to be what we call the Narrows. I mean, if you want to understand, like, if you're not anywhere near a port city like that, or you don't even get to be near the water, just go on YouTube and look up any major port city from today all the way through the past, and then watch that shit on fast forward and just watch how these guys function. And it's, they're like roads, but there's no lines. There's nothing to tell them what to really necessarily do. It's amazing how fast and complicated this is every single day. And then you have these idiots who come out here and they're like, well, I'm bigger, I'm moving, they'll just get out of my way, I'm working with them, and it's dangerous.
And with a lot of these ships too, just as a side note, the larger your ship, obviously it's not like a car. You have your brakes, but you're still going to be kind of moving in the water. I think what it takes is like a cruise liner. If she's moving at full speed, it'll take her like a nautical mile, so a little bit less than a road mile, to come to a complete stop, even if she's at full reverse. These things are not easy to move around.
Yeah, and instead, he's basically driving this thing around like it's a 2-lane road, and he's that one guy that loves to run up on your bumper and then just go right around you. Eventually, you always see him, like, you come up over that hill, and he almost comes, like, face-to-face with another car. Like, this is what this guy is basically begging for.
Yeah. And so it's inevitable that the Emo and the Mont Blanc are going to come across one another's path.
Yeah, you can't help it. They're just coming in opposite ways. Yeah. It's bound to happen.
And it's at 8:30 in the morning, as the two ships moved into the bottleneck known as the Narrows, that the Mont Blanc pilot, Francis Mackay, watches the Emo about 3/4 of a mile ahead as it moves into his ship's path, as if they intend to cut them off.
It's going to make you freak out real bad.
Yeah. No, that's not anything I want to see. And, concerned, Mackay, he has the Mont Blanc give one horn blast to indicate that his boat has the right of way, and that the Emo needed to reroute.
I'm going where I should be. Move.
Yeah, and like when the right of way, they're a munition ship. They're going to have the right of way.
However, nobody knows except for their own crew that they are a munition ship.
Yeah, and that's the problem. But the pilot thinks something, but they're not flying the flag.
It's cool. He told them. He's like, I'm going. It's my right of way. You need to move, right?
Yeah, but the emo, he doesn't agree. And they give 2 short horn blasts, which is announcing that they're going to stay their current course, and you better move out of our way. And the captain of the Mont Blanc shifts their ship just slightly starboard, closer to shore, but with his cargo, he couldn't risk going any further and running aground. Again, like I said, that's what the pilots know. They know how close they can get.
And he's full of freaking explosives. He cannot even jostle this ship.
And once again, the Mont Blanc blasts a single horn, pressing the emo to shift course again. And again, the emo's not listening. Another 2 horn blasts. The emo was not moving. All the noise actually had started gathering attention. Sailors on nearby boats were aware that these horn signals were, hey, move, hey, I'm not gonna.
Hey, move.
Hey, I'm not gonna. You move. And people in town, they're near the water's edge, and you live in one of these port cities, you kind of start to learn what's going on. You talk and you hear it.
Yeah, and at least you know that you wouldn't constantly hear 2 boats, like, keep talking to each other.
And, what they're doing now is they're all coming to the water's edge to watch. Right now, you've got that one situation where you hear those screeching tires of a car coming to its brake, and you're waiting for that crash.
Yeah, you're waiting and you're listening, and if you're anywhere nearby, you're definitely watching, right?
Yep. And at this point, though, both ships had decided to cut their engines. But like I said, it takes forever for one of these vessels to slow down with the amount of inertia that they have. And they continue to move forward while they're slowing down, but still on a forward path at each other. As the 2 ships bore down on one another, Mackay aboard the Mont Blanc made a last-second bid to avoid crashing. Unable to turn starboard because of the shore, he steered hard to port to cross before the emo.
So he pooped his pants.
Yeah, he's like, oh shit.
I can't turn this way. This guy's not turning. I just, Hail Mary, here we go. And he turns the ship.
Yep, and it almost worked. The ships were almost parallel to one another when the emo let out 3 horn blasts as they threw their engines into reverse.
Freaking idiots.
The emo suddenly had swerved, and at 8:45, hit head-on with a Mont Blanc.
Yeah. So, like we said, we've got the Mont Blanc that's totally loaded with all its supplies. Like, it's laden, like, the captain knows how to work it. Like, they're kind of further down in the water. The thing with the emo is that they haven't picked up their supplies yet. They're a totally empty, ship with just their crew, and he's going at higher speeds, and he's a little higher up in the water, and just the way that he throws this thing into reverse and it starts spinning the propeller, it just spins that nose around. So had he just let it be, they would have passed each other. But because he thought suddenly he needed to do something, he throws it in reverse and it just knocks the nose right into this other boat. It's a slow collision. It's a low speed collision. They still hit a boat full of explosives.
And I said it wrong. It's not a head to head. They hit the number 1 hold on the starboard side. And that shock actually had thrown a jolt through the ship, even though it was kind of a minor hit. This is a boat full of barrels of explosives and jet fuel. And it knocks benzol all across the top deck, leaking all over the deck and into the hold.
Yeah, and the crew sees this, and they're losing their minds. Like, they know this is a bad time.
They all know what's going on here. And it's at this time, the emo, who doesn't quite know what the Mont Blanc has, tries to disengage from the Mont Blanc, and it puts its engines forward, and as the ships pulled apart, the metal scraping casts off sparks, igniting the vapors of the leaking benzol.
Yeah, this is bad. This is a bad moment. He couldn't leave well enough alone. They hit each other. He wants to pull away. He wants to move on, and doesn't realize that it causes this fire. But it's instant.
And fire quickly shot up the sides of the ship. The crew of the Mont Blanc panicked, surprised that they weren't already instantly blown apart.
Yeah, I don't blame them.
I could never imagine being on a ship that's a walking time bomb.
I mean, when you think that you should have just died that moment, can you not help but start touching yourself for a minute? No.
At that point, the captain, he just orders everyone in the lifeboats, not even dropping anchor, just bailing out of the flaming ship that's still moving forward and full of explosives.
Yeah,
they know what's going to happen.
They gotta go. They literally abandon it. Don't even drop anchor. They're just fuck it, and they're off.
And these lifeboats hit the water. The crew is desperately rowing for shore. They're heading to Dartmouth. And they're trying to make as much distance between the Mont Blanc and themselves because they know what's going to happen. The harbor flew into a flurry of activity as other ships began to reroute towards the burning ship to give aid. Nautical law, if you see a vessel under distress or underpowered, you have a responsibility to assist that vessel.
Or the fact that you just watched his crew bail out. Or the fact that it's still moving and on fire.
Pick one. Pick one. The problem here, though, is no one knows what this ship is because, again, that red flag is still not raised.
Yeah, they know that this is an issue, this is a problem, and it's on fire, but they have no idea just how bad it is. So they're willingly heading straight towards it.
Yeah. And on land, more people are starting to gather. They hear the crash. They're stopping to watch. Businesses are pausing. Even the trolleys have stood still just to watch what's going on in the harbor.
Yeah, just so people can rubberneck it over there.
There's huge clouds of black smoke pouring into the sky, and the ship is still moving forward. And the fleeing crew, they appear to be yelling in French, screaming at least 2 ships passing them going towards the Mont Blanc. But with all the noise, they were never heard. And they're screaming in French. One account saying that they may have been yelling something foreign that sounded like explosion.
Which really, it surprised me in doing the research for this that a lot of people actually said in Halifax at the time there weren't that many French speakers. So when they say, oh, these guys were yelling something and something foreign and it kind of sounded like explosion, like it's deciphered. You'll see a lot of stories that flat out say these guys never even bothered to say anything to anyone. Like they ran off, like they didn't even try to warn people. But then you realize, like, okay, everyone's already like this is a busy port. There's lots of noise. There's lots of movement. Now there's a crash. Now there's more ships racing towards this. I mean, you're just simply a couple guys in a rowboat screaming at the top of your lungs. Like whether or not anyone heard them or could do anything about it, the point is what these guys weren't heading to a boat necessarily to alert anybody. They were just running for their lives.
Yeah. Well, one thing with the French, though, is like, yeah, Nova Scotia is probably French, but even I don't know when it is, but eventually Quebec becomes the only place in Canada that speaks French, and everyone in Canada hates them because they speak French. It's a thing. It's like not liking Florida because we have Florida Man.
Which is all of us.
I know.
So don't come.
And once they reach shore, the crew abandons the 2 rowboats, leaving them unmoored, just moving. They're running for their lives to the tree line.
This blows my mind. Like, I get it. I get that you have a responsibility to deal with this boat, and everyone's trying to stop it and, like, put it out. But I think someone should have realized that the reaction these guys were having, like, there's one thing when you, like, we've talked about it before when we did our other, like, our Titanic special, like, boats, they crash. They bump into each other. It's like any vehicle. And sometimes, like, it's catastrophic. And then sometimes it's not that bad. This wasn't necessarily, in most people's mind, like, this wasn't that bad. However, I think they should have realized, like, there wouldn't be a reason why the entire crew bailed the way they did if there wasn't something wrong. They weren't just trying to get away from trouble. Like, they were getting away from something really bad. It's like watching a bunch of people running past you on the road. Like, you might just turn and start running with them. Like, they're running from something, right? Like.
And one of my problems with this, though, is that the crew, they have responsibility to stop that ship.
The captain did.
But I don't know what happened, but they just.
Self-preservation,
man. And lack of experience is what I think it is. And they should have anchored that ship at the very least.
Yeah, at the very least, they should have tossed anchor and then bailed.
As of right now, everyone's running to shore, and the Mont Blanc continues on, heading for Pier 6 at the foot of Richmond Street in Halifax. This thing is not stopping. It also appeared to be coming near the docked ship known as the Picton, which was also an ammunition ship.
Yeah, I mean, like, we're not lying. Like, this is the place to come through if you're bringing supplies to Europe, and a bunch of these guys are carrying ammunition. And the Picton actually knows what it's carrying, so this is going to start being a major issue.
They see fire, they know they're carrying gunpowder, and they're starting to batten down their hatches because they don't want that fire to touch their cargo and to cause them to explode. 750 feet away from where the Picton is, at the rail yard, railway dispatchers Patrick Vincent Coleman and William Lovett were informed of the impending accident. Both went to run when Coleman remembered something very important. Just minutes away, there's an inbound train from New Brunswick, and she was carrying 300 passengers.
Yeah. They're literally heading into a problem. And when he says, like we just said, nobody knows what the Mont Blanc is. So everybody's racing forward to go deal with it, right? But again, we just told you what the Picton is carrying. So when they see it heading near, not even just close to these guys carrying ammunition, that's when people start freaking out. I mean, all the sailors on board the Picton are actually batting down everything, just trying to control if their own boat is about to be like blown up. So that's why someone actually runs up to the railway yard and has the conscious like idea of being like, hey, there's about to be a crash to an ammunitions boat.
Yeah, and Coleman, he's, like I said, he returned back to send a message. And according to the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic, his message was read as such: "Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor making for Pier 6 and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys."
That makes me so sad.
He was the only person who actually had the wherewithal to do something about this.
Yeah, no, he took that moment. Again, self-preservation. He was ready to run, and then he remembered what was at stake and who could stop that. And
he had the ability to.
He had the ability to, and he literally sacrificed himself because he knew, like, this could be bad. The reason I'm not bringing this, like, train in is because I think people will die, including myself, and he made that choice. He's a hero. And thanks to Coleman and his bravery, literally all the incoming trains to Halifax came to a halt. And meanwhile, the tugboat Stella Maris, it began to respond immediately to everything that was happening on the water. So it had actually been tugging 2 boats behind it, and it went ahead and it dropped off those 2 boats and then turned around and headed back towards the Mont Blanc as it's crashed into Pier 6. So the little tugboat on board had a single fire hose, and they intended to show up and try and keep the pier from going up on fire. But once they get there, once they start using the hose on the ship, on the fire, they realize that this single hose, it's insufficient. For some reason, the fire's not going out. Like, this is much hotter than our little hose can deal with.
These little tugboats, you'll see some videos of them. A lot of them are, those heroic tugboats. Those ones are sped up a little bit. But those little boats, their captains are freaking ballsy because their ship can do a lot. But there are certain things that the ships can't do, like put out a giant fire from an exploding boat.
Yeah.
But they're going to try.
And here's to say a lot of this seems to be going really quickly. I mean, these guys were moving at 7:30 a.m. They actually strike each other at like 8:30.
Yeah.
Or just about 9 a.m., the fires have been going on for a while, and just as 9 a.m. rolls around, barrels of the airplane fuel on the top deck and the ammunition shells that were up there as well, they actually begin to go off. They begin to explode and ricochet from the deck, flying straight up into the air and exploding like fireworks. And then one of those explosions actually rocked another ship, the Wasper B, and actually hit it in its gas tank and set that tugboat on fire, like blew that tugboat up. After that, obviously, the call went out to all the fire departments. You need to come out here. We need help fighting this fire.
We got an issue out here, guys.
Yeah. So the tugboat Stella Maris, they actually end up pulling back just as a whaler and another steamer start to pull up to give aid. And together, those 2 ships, they're going to work together to secure a hold of the Mont Blanc and hopefully get it, pull it away, and tow it away from the pier so that the fire can't spread any further. Unfortunately, the line that they needed to use to do this, the hawser, that happened to be too small. And so they ended up needing one that would be twice the size of that. The order comes down for them to get a new hawser. At this point, the boat's been burning for about 20 minutes. And just as they put this order out, at 9:04 in the morning, in fact, it's specifically 9 a.m., 4 minutes, 35 seconds, the highly explosive cargo goes off. And the Mont Blanc it erupts. And the reason I can say so specifically what this timing is for is because the blast ends up registering on the seismic record. It is that big.
It's a big one.
The town hall clock in Halifax, would forever remain stuck reading 9:05 a.m.
So Back to the Future.
It is. So this explosion, just the damage that results of it's so extreme. I'm going to tell you guys, it's literally like a supernatural force was trying to wipe it off the map. I mean, the Mont Blanc is obliterated. It is gone. Like at the very center of this like explosion, it hit up to about 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It is hot. And the blast wave that comes off this thing, it literally moves more than 3,300 feet per second. That's fast.
That's really fast. Yeah, you're not outrunning that.
And it's so big that this shock wave could be felt all the way in Cape Breton, which happened to be 129 miles away. So as the boat explodes, as it starts hitting everything else, pieces of this ship blew for miles around. The half-ton shaft of that anchor that they didn't drop, the one they should have probably used, that ends up 2 miles away in Armdale. And then the body of one of their 90-millimeter forward guns, it lands 3.5 miles away in Dartmouth near Albro Lake.
That'd be bad to be like 3 miles away from this and just get hit by a cannon.
Something shook for a second, and then all of a sudden, you're just like, your dad just gets crushed under like half a cannon.
Well, that's very specific.
Like, wouldn't that be crazy?
Yeah.
So at the time, those 3 ships, you got the tug, you got the whaler, and you got the steamer that's come up. Those 3 boats suffer mass casualties. So all of the crew but one on the whaler dies. Everybody on the steamer dies. And then 21 out of the 26 aboard the tug, the Stella Maris, they die as well. Of the 68 sailors who happened to be trying to band down the Picton, the ammunition boat we talked about earlier, 53 died instantly. Just a few minutes later, 2 more would perish. So when I say this explosion was intense, I'm not kidding. It was so strong that the water around the boat, around the explosion, evaporated. The pressure that happened, it displaced the water in the harbor, exposing the bottom, like no water whatsoever. And it ended up actually forming a 60-foot high tsunami wave. So this freaking thing, like, not only is there a huge explosion, not only is there a shockwave moving out, it causes a tsunami that it just starts hitting boats and pushing them out. Sailors on board are knocked over and swept away. The Emo ends up being pushed out onto the Dartmouth shore. They're grounded. And as the blast goes out, it extends over 400 acres. It crushes people, buildings, everything in its path. And 1,600 people die instantly. Sometimes even this number is actually called to be low.
Yeah, I've seen numbers upwards of closer to 2,000.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, and that's, eventually you have to take into account, like, who gets injured and who will die later. But when we say instantly, there are bodies that were never found. 250 people were never identified. There could have been a lot more. I mean, that's nuclear bomb before the nuclear bomb ever happened. Yeah. Of those people, a couple names you might remember. The railway controller, Coleman, he died instantly on the spot. Protecting people, knowing this would come, he technically sacrificed himself. Only one member of the 8-man fire engine crew of the Patricia survived. Everyone died. He was sitting in the front seat of the fire truck, and it literally blew him out of his seat, blew his clothes off. The blast, it literally threw him into the telegraph wires. Yeah. He thought he was dead. And then he ended up getting swept away by some of the water that came pushing up.
I'm just making silent faces at this point, everyone. I definitely am kind of funny for this sort of stuff, but
I mean, it's hard to imagine it, and that something this big could just randomly happen in your city. In fact, we just had an explosion down here in Florida in Plantation, and like, it was huge, and luckily no one died. And of course, it wasn't to this size, but it's just not something you think of happening in your average day city or town. Of the Mont Blanc crew, the guys that took off and ran as far as they could, as fast as they could before anybody else could, they actually still got hurt. They managed to make it to the tree line, and still one of their crew ended up dying from injuries from the explosion. 4 others were also injured, but they managed to live. In this explosion, over 1,249 homes were wrecked. 824 buildings just completely collapsed and were gone. 12,000 more were damaged, reaching over like a 1.6 mile radius.
Yeah, these are not small explosions we're dealing with, everyone. Like,
when we say this many people died instantly, imagine at the same time that every building for blocks is just crumbled. There is nothing left standing. And then imagine what that does to the human body just standing there in the road. No protection.
No, that's going to be vaporizing you.
Yeah, basically. Entire stone and concrete factories, in fact, had fell to nothing but heaps of rubble. And then the longtime native settlements across the way, they were completely destroyed. Over 6,000 people basically became instantly homeless.
Yeah, it's amazing and terrifying what this explosion did.
I don't know. I think it would be just stunning and not in a good way. So, of the buildings that actually managed to remain standing, of course, they were damaged, but almost all of them had their windows blown in. A lot of people like to say there wasn't a single pane of glass left standing in town, which is not necessarily true, but it's intense.
Embellishment.
Now, here's the issue with that. Remember we said everybody is coming down to see what's going on? Like, this is a huge issue in town. There's a lot of sound. There's a lot of noise. The fire literally went on for 20 minutes. It's not like people didn't have time to hear a commotion. And at this point, people are, not only coming to their windows of their homes, but they're also like in these big storefront windows, maybe they're shopping and they come down and the way that these harbor towns tend to work is like they're a little bit uphill. You can kind of technically see all the way down into the harbor.
Yeah, you can see everything that's going down there.
There's, everyone kind of has a reason to come out by their windows. And that's exactly where they're standing when this gigantic explosion goes off that's literally moving faster than 3,000 feet a second. And it just blows these windows in on them. And people, they're terribly hurt. Many are killed. Just from the glass, the flying debris. For years, because this happens in 1917 and then radio comes out, TV comes out, there are recordings of people for years, all the way into the 50s and 60s, and they talk about their experience. And they say that for 20 years, they literally were pulling pieces of glass out of their skin. That's how intense, their bodies were filled with debris. At the time, over 1,000 people ended up having serious eye injuries. 37 of them were just blinded entirely. And in the end, it was estimated to be around 1 in every 50 people in Halifax were either blinded or had a significant eye damage.
That's a lot of glass and a lot of eyes. So
yeah.
That's just, I can imagine that. And it's one of those things that going through and reading this, I didn't expect that kind of specific injury that happened.
Yeah, you never expect eyeballs to be permanently damaged when you're thinking about an explosion. You're thinking about people and bodies. And in fact, there were a lot of bodies. Bodies were hanging from the windows. This explosion happened and people just didn't go, ow. People died and then fell forward. The other bodies were just tangled up in the telegraph lines. There were literally limbs and pieces of people and stuff raining down from the sky. Homes shook, and then candles and lamps and stoves were knocked over. So if your house didn't completely crumble, everything in it was moving. And at this time, most people don't have electricity. It's the middle of winter in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, it's cold and snowy and
it's awful, and people want to be warm. This happens and everything gets knocked over. Not only is there this huge explosion, not only is there boats going off in the harbor, but your house is now rattling, your things are falling over, and there's mass fires spreading throughout the city. And particularly hard hit is the north end, where there's literally blocks of buildings that are just engulfed in flame. So if you happen to survive the blast in a building, you might just end up being trapped under the debris of a burning house. And they said they could hear people screaming inside. In the end, over 548 buildings burned. Halifax is literally covered in blood, and it's burning away into shambles.
Yeah, the whole area was really rocked. And in the end, it's the survivors' stories make it much more real.
Yeah.
Yeah. For instance, it's a story of survivor Minnie Jackson McGrath. On December 6th, Minnie had been at home with her mother and her sister and her 2-year-old son, Clifford. Minnie had fed Clifford breakfast and just settled him down for a nap when she heard the commotion from the harbor. Minnie, her mother, and her sister all gathered at the home's window to look down at the ruckus. Minnie's mother turned to her and suggested that she run across the street and alert the neighbors to whatever was happening. Minnie obeyed, taking off from her home at 18th Duffus Street, 800 meters away from the harbor, and scurrying across the road. As she raised her hand to knock on the neighbor's door, the massive explosion had hit. In the next moment, Minnie was flying through the air. Her clothes had been blown off in the shockwave, and she awoke in a field north of her home. But looking around, she did not recognize, where she even was. All the homes she knew were blown away.
Yeah, she's literally not about to knock on the door, and the next thing she knows, she's in some field somewhere. And when she looks around her, there's literally nothing. There's nothing left standing. She doesn't know where the hell she is.
And, beside her, something's moving. And in a daze, she picks up an injured but still moving baby. In her haze, she assumed it to be Clifford.
Yeah, she thinks it's her son.
But it wasn't. Minnie stood, and from her leg protruded a piece of shrapnel. And bleeding herself with the injured baby in her arms, Minnie began to walk.
So she's basically in shock.
Yeah.
She doesn't recognize, it's a baby. Doesn't realize it's not her 2-year-old son.
And, a man had spotted her injured and ran to her, wrapping her in his coat and taking the dying baby from her arms. Many dazed survivors had actually stumbled through the streets, many at first assuming that the Germans had successfully attacked.
I mean, it would totally make sense. This is the biggest fear.
This is a huge blast. It's not just a small run-of-the-mill blast. This is
it's bigger than anything they'd ever heard.
Going up.
Because you have to, at this time, we've got the anti-submarine nets coming up. There's a curfew. I mean, we're talking, at night, the lights are off. You don't get to go out. You don't get to do stuff. We are in protection mode, and then this happens, despite the fact that a lot of people had seen, heard something going on down there, maybe they've been watching from a really far distance, the majority of people who could have even seen this probably didn't really survive this.
Yeah, and meanwhile, many wandered, some off in search of medical aid, others digging out buildings in hopes to rescue survivors, friends, families, loved ones. What police and firemen and military personnel survived also joined in to the rescue efforts. Multiple ships carrying ammunition in the harbor were aflame and had to be put out. Many sailors that survived the explosions in tsunami rushed to rescue those that had been swept away in the water. Some sailors who came ashore rushed to clear aircraft bombs out of a magazine and began to pile them up so that, if they had to, they could push them into the harbor in hopes to limit the possible explosion. Get them underwater, maybe they're not going to go off.
Yeah, I mean, we already said there's an army base there. This is a huge harbor. They've got people coming in with ammunition. So they know, we were worried about that one boat that was an ammunition boat, but he was unloading. We literally hold this stuff, and we're lucky it didn't go off already. So they're freaking out and worried that this is just going to be an issue.
Commander John Hopkins, the chief engineer from the High Flyer, who'd been in Dartmouth running a training program, ordered his sailors to dispatch door-to-door searches for the next 6 hours through damaged homes. They carried what injured they could find to the hospital. Others collected beds to be brought to the infirmary, knowing they would soon be overflowed. The crew of the Mont Blanc was collected up and brought on board the High Flyer under suspicion that they were responsible for the explosion.
Yeah, something like this happens, and you just watch these guys run like that, and you're mad. You want somebody to blame, and you want to have somebody hang for this. So as soon as, there's one explosion, there's another explosion as things start to, go off on other boats. And even as soon as this kind of happens, and despite the fact that it's so bad closer to the epicenter of it, the injured start pouring into facilities right away looking for help, looking for aid. A local doctor, at some point, he's quoted about coming up from his cellar, and there's already a guy waiting in his house looking for his help. And he says, right away, I worked, but all my equipment went very quickly. All the supplies, everybody's so hurt. And of course, first comes the lesser hurts, the people who've been in windows, the people from a distance and got hit by flying debris. And then over time passes, the worse it becomes because people are making their way from that epicenter where there's nothing that can help them. Surgeons ended up operating nonstop just for hours with minimal anesthesia. They didn't have a lot to help them out. There was an ophthalmologist named George Cox, and he's down there working with all these extreme eye injuries. He ended up having to remove 79 eyes within 48 hours. That's a lot of people's heads to be working on.
Yeah, and a lot of eyes.
And when we're talking about this many people, multiple people in a family would have lost their eyes. And it's just, we don't see that. We, as I would say, Canadians or Americans or the general like first world countries, you don't walk around and see a lot of people missing limbs and fingers and eyes, and like this would not be something normal for them. But after 1917, if you were in Halifax, they're like men, women, children, you would pass and at least most of them would be missing like an eye or have a damaged eye. News of this disaster obviously is huge. It's the biggest explosion to basically ever happen, and news passes fast because thank God we didn't have those trains coming in, so they're already alerted to what's going on. They get rerouted. People in other towns are being asked for help, so they're gathering people, they're gathering volunteers to come in and aid them. And news goes on, and, within minutes, you're getting the local aid, but within hours, you're starting to see international aid. By that same night, a train loaded with supplies and medical personnel leaves Boston, headed for Halifax, and it's going to need it, because they're like, this is nowhere near done. So, like I said, they're going to be busy for days, because the search just goes on for any survivors they can find. And this actually becomes incredibly hard because if this wasn't bad enough, the next day, the area is actually hit by one of the worst blizzards they've seen in about 20 years.
Just to add insult to injury, apparently.
Yeah, they literally, like, within a day, they get 16 inches of snow. I mean, if we just said 6,000 people are homeless.
Yeah.
Others are still trapped under the rubble. If you didn't die from the fire, you didn't if you didn't die from your house falling on you, at this point, you're probably just going to freeze to death if they haven't gotten you out yet. So, unfortunately, with the snow, some of the searches were forced to temporarily become suspended. The only good thing to come out of this storm was the fact that it did help put some of the raging fires that was still going on all throughout the city out.
That's one,
it's one small blessing.
Reward of it, yeah.
So I guess there's a lot of stories, like we said, like we already told minis, and it makes it more real. And then there's still little endearing stories. And out of that, I guess the one that is most people's favorite would be Ashpan Annie. So at the time of the explosion, 23-month-old Annie was living with her family on Flynn Block. Now, at the time, everything's happening down in the harbor, her mom and her brother just happened to be down there watching everything go on. She'd been at home with who knows who else, but she'd been left at home, like in the house.
Yeah.
So when the explosion goes off, her mom and brother just die instantly. Annie's house, which happened to be only 350 meters from the explosion, is just completely flattened with her inside of it. Now, the following morning, after this whole incident, there's a neighbor, and it's also a soldier, and he's PTE Benjamin Henneberry, and he's over there because he's searching through the rubble looking for his own children.
Yeah.
When he just so happens to hear a noise, under the rubble, and he still thinks it's his kid, but either way, he goes racing over there and starts pulling debris up. He yells over and he gets the attention of more soldiers, and they also come over and start helping him. And what they find is that all this debris, everything, the house had collapsed all the way down into the cellar. And they start digging it up, and under the smoking ruins, because it's still just like it literally had just been on fire, they find a stove. Well, under the stove is a baby. There's little Annie, 23-month-old Annie, underneath like an ash pan that had protected her from the stove. But the only reason she'd probably survived was that stove, because she'd been laying there for 26 hours, and that was all that kept her warm. And Annie actually went on to go live on to be like 95 years old.
Surprised they didn't hear her before those 26 hours. I was a 2-year-old baby not getting fed for a day. I'd be screaming.
There's just so much.
Yeah.
There's so much noise, so much damage. I can only imagine. In the end, the Halifax explosion was going to be going down as one of the largest explosions of all time that had ever happened before the invention of the atom bomb. The explosion was so large that it was actually used to help measure other explosions, with one report stating that the little boy, the bomb that dropped on Hiroshima, was only 7 times larger than the size of the Halifax explosion. There was an estimate of about 2,000 dead from the explosion, with around 9,000 injured.
And like we were saying, like Shannon was saying, there's a lot of eye injuries. But one of the nice things that came out of this is Halifax had actually become home to one of the world's best vision centers, known as the Canadian National Institute for the Blind. With all that was going on, the globe had been come together, and right in Halifax, they started that area because of all the people that had lost their eyes and lost sight from the explosion. And out of this disaster, there were additional aspects of the world that were kind of reinvigorated and reinforced. Pediatric care at this point, especially in Halifax, wasn't all that great. So that, along with public sanitation and maternity care, were both being revolutionized because of this explosion.
Yeah, so there is a silver lining if you need to find one. That would be it. This area, I mean, it had to deal with an issue that came about, and they did.
And, it's been said that the aftermath of the explosion had changed the landscape, with shrapnel and other debris being flung around and embedded in local trees. So much so that anyone that was logging or dealing with lumber, even as far down as the southern United States, just wouldn't deal with Halifax trees because they don't know what's in those trees, and that could be super damaging to their equipment. You're cutting through that with a chainsaw or any kind of lumber mill. You could easily break all your equipment off of military-grade hardware. Yeah. That's just embedded in trees.
Can you imagine whole forests just no longer being viable because, there might be, like, random pieces of scrap metal in them?
There's one gentleman who was actually cutting down... He wasn't cutting down trees. He's an arborist. Someone who's kind of like a tree surgeon in a way. They help control logging fields. And he would actually cut down trees. And if he knew that there was something in the tree, he would try to cut a board out of that tree with that piece in it to make memorial plaques and stuff like that. He would try to use the debris that's in the tree to make bowls or wood.
See, that's
planks.
Really cool, though. That's
so that kind
like
of
an
arose
artisan
out
thing.
of it. Yeah, it's such an artisan thing.
And like Corey said, like with it being in all these trees, what buildings were left behind, like they had been hit too. And even though a lot of them had to be rebuilt, some of that shrapnel, it still sticks in these buildings today.
Yeah, so you can kind of go visit these buildings that have this shrapnel in it. St. Paul's Church in Halifax, it actually has two grim reminders that they've kind of memorialized. The first one is a shattered window from the explosion. It looks like a silhouette of a man's head and shoulders. And you can see the pictures online. We'll throw them up on the Instagram. And it's very kind of eerie the way it looks. But they've got it guarded, too.
It's also a ghost story because they said every time they replace this window, it just keeps coming back.
Yeah, I'm going to let... Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not going to even touch that because I don't deal with that sort of shit.
All the places to be haunted because of, like, a terrible incident, so many deaths, like, wouldn't this be one of them?
Yeah.
But I don't know. The point is like, a lot of the places, if they have pieces of this, they'll memorialize it, and you can go there today, and you can see an actual piece of history, that's so important to them.
And not just that window, but there's a piece of a window frame that's actually embedded in the wall of the church. And that's part of this whole explosion as well. And now, we're kind of looking at the aftermath at this point. A year after the disaster, they had the commemoration for the dead and a memorial service. But after that, they didn't have like a second year, a third year memorial service. It was just kind of didn't really get spoken about again.
This was so bad, and this affected literally everyone that had been there.
Yeah.
That it almost became like a conversation that was just unanimously agreed, like, we don't discuss.
And that's a lot of what happened. I mean, you see the injuries from all the people that were there. Like Shannon was saying, you don't have mass eye stuff going on or any kind of like these
missing
massive
limbs.
Injuries.
And at this point, every day is a reminder. Everyone you look at, it shows, and it's just not spoken.
Yeah, the second commemorative memorial was actually on the 50th anniversary of the explosion. And after this, it starts where we are building memorial reminders, statues, paintings, stories actually being told and written, like poems and books.
Yeah, there's a lot less people that are still around that had to actually live through it, and a lot more people who had to deal with the aftermath or learn from school and realize this was something we should, like, remember these people, especially the people who sacrificed a lot.
Yeah.
And, it starts to actually be talked about more, and it starts to come into the public's eye.
Yeah, in 1964, a memorial library is actually built, and that's dedicated to the victims. But one of the interesting things for me, especially being from Massachusetts, is in 1918, Halifax actually sent a Christmas tree to Boston the following year as a thank you for their quick response to helping out. Boston and parts of Massachusetts, they were the first people to get into Halifax to help from the international group. And it could have been Maine, it could have been anyone, but it was Boston that jumped to the rescue.
Yeah, it was that train we talked about.
Yeah, that train. So as a result, they sent that tree in 1918. But then, like everything else, it kind of went quiet for a long time. People weren't talking about it, weren't acknowledging that happened. But the tradition kind of picked back up in 1971. First it was the city of Halifax, and then it became province of Nova Scotia and their Department of Natural Resources. They actually started sending trees in 1971. And this tree is the tree, if you go to Boston, the city of Boston during Christmas nowadays, on Boston Common, they're always going to set a tree. They're going to light a tree up. It's the city tree of Boston, similar to what you have in New York City. But this one always comes from Halifax. And it's a tradition that helps Boston remember how close they are to this one city. And it gives them that camaraderie and that brotherhood or relationship to the city of Halifax that they helped out. And they will always put that tree up as their Christmas tree. It's their official tree. And the interesting thing about it is that the Natural Resource Department from Nova Scotia, they always have very specific guidelines for picking out this one tree that they're going to send forward to Boston. So it's not just any old tree. They're going to pick the best tree they can find.
Well, if it's Boston's Christmas tree, it's got to be a damn good one, right?
Yeah, it's going to have to be. And, obviously it's a thank you.
Yeah, and in the end, throughout history, at this point, like we said, more people are talking about it. The explosion's a little, further down history, so you're not going to see as many people nowadays who will even remember being there or being a part of it. Like we said, Annie lived to be about 95.
Yeah.
So we literally just hit 2017, just a little while ago, and that was the 100-year anniversary, and there was at this point, they're doing huge shows and museums. They have the books that literally annotates every person that died, where they were, where the bodies are. It's something that's very well noted, and it's remembered in a peaceful, sad, but melancholy, but respectful way. And that's where it stands today with the whole explosion that happened in Halifax. It was literally, like we said, people considered it a weapon of mass destruction because it was completely man-made. It was caused by us fucking up pretty
It just
bad.
wasn't intentional as a weapon.
Yeah.
But that's the large explosion that you've never heard about.
And you can go and even see pieces of it today, which is just, it's crazy.
Yep.
And I think that's a good ending to a very explosive 4th of July. Oh. Yeah, anyways, thank you guys for listening. We really do appreciate it.
So if you're still listening at this point, click, subscribe, follow.
Yeah, whatever. If you want to follow us on Twitter or
I'm pointing
Instagram,
around to the like button.
Yeah, you can find us anywhere at Snap Food Podcast, at anything. And again, if you want them stickers or you just want to reach out to us, you got a story you want us to dive really deep into and tell that nobody else is telling and you want to hear it, just let us know. Give us a little slide into our DMs. How about that?
Let's do it.
All right, till next week.
Bye, everyone.
See ya.